much again, Kristen, for being with me. Every single time I meet with someone, I am just anticipating the story on the other end. So welcome. Thank you again. I'm so excited to hear your story. And thanks again for meeting me in the back of my car today.
No worries. Thank you so much for sharing my story and for sharing all of our stories. I think we can all find encouragement from this for sure.
Yeah, I love it. I'm so thankful to be a part of it. I'm just a conduit. So let's get started. So talk, about your process and your journey. Think about where you were in the beginning of all of this. How old were you? What was your mindset? When did you know that you needed help? Let's start there.
Okay. So I had actually started in my early 20s. I started dating my husband. We realized, we were getting more serious, but we were still in college and kids were not on the brain at all. So I actually got on birth control pills just because that was just what, we would do, like you're in a serious relationship. It's just kind of, you talk with your friends like, oh, I'm taking a pill and, so I got on birth control pills. And I will say that prior to being on birth control medication, my cycles were very regular. I had, the perfect cycle, so to speak. It was a 30-day cycle. I didn't track ovulation at the time, but given that it was just the perfect textbook cycle, I had no issues or anything. Then I got on birth control, and I was on birth control for a couple years. And I noticed that after maybe about 6 or 7 months of being on birth control, that my cycle would no longer line up with the way the pills were going. Pills while you're on your cycle, and then you had your actual birth control on the other 3 weeks. And I noticed my cycles weren't lining up, and I spoke with my doctor, and she was like, well, let's up the hormone basically. And so I did that for maybe another year or so. And after a while, I just didn't like how I felt. I didn't like that, just the increase in hormone. I just felt different. I didn't care for it anymore. I had a lot more side effects. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to get off of this. I don't like it anymore. It's not working for me. And, we were using other methods at that point. And we got married in 2009, and we always knew we wanted kids. In 2009, I was 24 years old. And, we figured, okay, we got married in February 2009, and I was going to be 25 in July of that year. So I said, okay, well, we won't prevent, but we're not necessarily trying. So, whatever happens, happens. And so we didn't, prevent or anything. So nothing obviously happened. And I would say at the end of 2009 is when I was thinking, well, after doing research, they say, well, if you don't prevent pregnancy for a year, that, you should have gotten pregnant within the year. And I started to kind of research and figure out, is this normal? I spoke with my OB, and at the time, the OB that I had was just kind of like, oh, you're young, you're fine, it'll happen for you. And I just knew that something just wasn't right because, even before we got married, we weren't necessarily preventing pregnancy. And so I knew it had been, at least a couple years that we weren't preventing pregnancy. But again, at the time, I wasn't trying to get pregnant. So I really wasn't, paying too much attention to it. But I always knew it could be a possibility. So at the end of 2009, I decided to switch my OB because I didn't like that answer, to be honest. I mean, to say that, oh, you're young, it'll happen is just kind of, well, that doesn't, I don't like that. You really, as a doctor, I feel like do some testing, maybe try to figure out if someone's coming to you with a concern.
Right.
So I found another OB. They ran some testing. And at that point, I figured out, so this is now 2010, I figured out that I had PCOS. And at the same time, I found out that I had hypothyroidism as well, which can also cause fertility issues. So in that time period, just trying to, again, figure out how to deal with this diagnosis of having PCOS. And, of course, Google can be a double-edged sword because you can find some good information on there, but then you can also find out the scary information on there. So, I, again, found a new OB, and with this new OB, he was a little bit more fertility based. He had more information on fertility treatments. And so it still took many years because I didn't actually get pregnant until the first time I got pregnant was in 2013. So there was a 3-year period where I was just getting blood work done. I was getting Clomid, Femara, HCG trigger shots. But also in that process, I found out that I have 2 copies of the MTHFR gene mutation, which can cause blood clotting issues, and which unfortunately we found out because I did get pregnant in September of 2013, and I miscarried at 6 weeks. Basically, we went in at 6. I got a positive pregnancy test, and just like anyone, you're super excited and you're just over the moon after so many years. At this point, it was 3 years, which I know a lot of women go through many more years, but I think that, having gone through it for 3 years, at that point, I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm pregnant. It was such a happy time. And I go in and we find out there's no heartbeat at all. And after that, my doctor had ran some testing, and that's where I found out. Sorry, I'm kind of skipping ahead, but that's when I found out that I had 2 copies of the MTHFR gene mutation. And he told me that, if I were to become pregnant in the future, there would be kind of some extra steps I'd have to take as far as blood clotting the first 4 or 5 months of pregnancy. So I would have to take a blood thinner or a baby aspirin, things like that, just some extra little things because of that gene mutation. And again, this is blood work that was done with the second OB. That the first OB, I think if they had run like a full thorough investigation, I guess you could say, that this would have been discovered. And I think that, a lot of women probably don't even realize they could have something like this, because a lot of doctors, that's usually not the first thing they reach for, but it was obviously critical for, in my case, finding this information out. So I don't know if I covered everything. So let's see, I got pregnant in September 2013. I miscarried in the end of October of 2013. Oh, I forgot a key point here. My doctor gave me the choice of, to miscarry naturally or to have a D&C. And I didn't want to, I don't know why, I just thought doing it naturally, it just maybe would have been more traumatic. I don't know. So I said, okay, I'll, after researching a little bit of what a D&C is and how the procedure goes, I said, okay, well, I'm going to opt for the D&C. So I had the procedure done. And, at that point, because I felt like we were kind of in this cycle of taking fertility medication, getting the trigger shots, it was so scheduled, and just every single month, this is what we were doing. And the reason why I didn't go to other methods, the reason why I kept doing this, is because our insurance at the time was horrific. They did not cover any sort of IVF. They barely even covered what I was doing. And so that's why we didn't take any further measures besides taking Clomid and Femara and doing a trigger shot. But after the D&C in early November 2013, I I think I was just done at that point. Like it's like you reach your high of getting that positive pregnancy test, and then you get the news and you're just so deflated that I just wanted a break. It was right around the holidays, 2013, and I'm like, I just don't want to do this right now. I don't know when I want to start trying again. And at that point, I was in my late 20s. I was 28 years old, 29 years old. And I remember also researching after the DNC that a lot of women, like I'd go into like mommy forums and things like that, a lot of women that had a DNC actually ended up getting pregnant naturally within several months of having the DNC. And even my husband at the time, oh, my husband, he's still my husband. At the time, my husband's coworker, his mother, I think, had a DNC and ended up getting pregnant as well. So, yeah, so I just heard stories from women that, like, you know, that could happen, where they could get pregnant naturally after having a DNC. And I don't know why, that kind of, it gave me a little bit of hope. I had zero expectations. I was still very deflated, but for some reason it just gave me some hope regarding that. And so sure enough, I actually got pregnant March of 2014, 100% naturally.
Wow.
100%. And we were talking about faith earlier. I was like, this is 100% God. This is like, I was so shocked because I had done absolutely nothing different other than getting the DNC. And at that point, I was just not even focusing on getting pregnant again. It was just one of those fluke things, I guess, that happened that I truly believe God had a hand in, because we were not, again, we weren't trying, but we weren't preventing. It was just kind of, and getting pregnant naturally 4 months later, just this shock that kind of like came over me, because I remember reading that in the forum and I'm like, oh, okay, that's great, but I don't think that's going to happen to me, and I know that a lot of medical professionals will kind of discredit that, because there's nowhere where you can read in a medical journal that having a DNC will, help you get pregnant in the future. But all I can speak from is my personal experience, and the fact that I did nothing different from prior to the DNC to now after the DNC. So that's my testimony on that. And yeah, I got pregnant March of 2014, and my son was born in December of 2014. Healthy baby boy. He is now
Awesome.
6 years old. So it's I guess my story could be considered a little bit more simple, but at the time it was traumatic. Just even taking medication after medication, ultrasound after ultrasound, beta testing after beta testing. I still did all the, the beta testing. And, at first I remember I feel like, and I don't know if it was just my doctor's office, but they're very by the book. And so, I would get scared, because I remember with my son, they're like, well, your betas aren't doubling the way that they're supposed to. And, it kind of freaked me out again, because I kind of felt like my brain kind of went back to that first pregnancy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and I think that when you experience a loss, you'll always have that your entire pregnancy. Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, for me, it was, the only thing I can credit is the DNC that helped me. But yeah, having PCOS, I don't know if there was something with having that procedure done, if it somehow reset my system or did something to kind of, maybe with the uterine lining, I don't know, but I was able to get pregnant on my own 4 months later, and I will attest that that is 100% a miracle. I do feel like God had a hand in that 1000%. And my son is 6 now, and again, we're kind of in the same boat where we're not preventing at all, and nothing's kind of happened still. So it's kind of like, I mean, it was just kind of this miracle. He is my miracle baby.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah, that's
I
yeah.
I think that's great, because there are so many more women who aren't able to afford infertility treatments, the heavy duty IVF. And so
Mhm.
there's going to be more women who can relate to your story
Yeah,
versus someone who spent $100,000 into infertility treatments.
yeah,
Um, so I think it's great that you're sharing this, and like you said, doctors won't kind of like attest to,
no,
saying that that's what
right.
caused it or whatever, but there's something to it because if you're finding forums that the women are saying the same thing, wow,
Yeah.
well, maybe there's something to it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if the doctors will voluntarily do a DNC as a method to hopefully help someone get pregnant. But I guess if you're in the situation where, God forbid, you know, someone has a miscarriage, maybe opt for having a DNC just maybe to, I don't know, I can't recommend anything medically,
Right.
but I just know my story. And um, after doing some research, I thought, well, if I have to go through this, at least let me, I guess, maybe increase my chances of, if it worked for some women, it might work for me. And yeah, it's very hard. I mean, I think that even with IVF, and I know you shared your story, it's just this like cyclical thing that you just feel like you're never going to get off this wheel of like, okay, cycle day 1, on cycle day 3 I have to do this, and then I got to go in on 12 cycle day 12, and then they're going to tell me how my follicles are doing, and it's just this like every single month.
Yeah.
And it is so draining, and it's difficult. And I had a lot of moments where I'm just like throwing my hands up, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm never going to be a mom. This is just not in the cards for me because I can't afford a IVF. Our insurance is horrible. They barely even cover the trigger shot, the HCG trigger shot that I, got previous cycles. And even just taking any sort of fertility medication, you become irritable. You put your body through a lot.
You do.
I can only imagine with IVF, it's even more so. And so, yeah, I'm happy that you let me share my story. I know, like I said, it's more simple, but hopefully it can encourage some women and can help them.
Yes. And it will. It absolutely will. It's so cool. I was just talking to a girl actually this morning who said she had her tubes tied, and years later, 4 years later, I think she had her baby girl, and it's just like what?
Wow. Wow.
So sometimes people just need to hear those crazy stories because anything is
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
So you know
1000%.
how many cycles did you have to do?
With Clomid, I did 5 cycles because I think they only let you have so many before you
Okay.
have to take a significant break. So I think with Clomid, I did 4 cycles, and then so I had switched OBs 3 times, to be honest. After the first one told me that, I switched. Then I moved to another one that she just kind of threw Clomid medication at me.
Yeah.
So I did that. And then the one that actually I feel really helped me, he was the one that discovered that I had the MTHFR mutations, and really it seemed like he really cared more, and he did a deep dive on my blood work and my history and things like that. But with him, I actually did a Clomid Femara combo, which is I think strange. I don't think most doctors do that. It's usually one or the other. And
Right.
I can't remember now at the time why I remember him telling me, well, Femara kind of like targets one particular aspect of fertility, and Clomid can kind of trigger a different aspect of it. I'm not really sure. And so, at that point, I was like, whatever. I'm like, I'll do it. I'm looking to have a baby. I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And that was actually the cycle with the trigger shot that helped me get pregnant the first time.
Okay.
So I knew, there was something there. And, obviously that cycle ended up in miscarriage, but at least through that, I was able to figure out that I had that gene mutation, which, yeah. So
I, I think that's great, because, whether it's an OBGYN or whether it's your RE, you still have to go to that person who's going to take the time to investigate your issues, because I can attest to that as well. And I'm sure many women can. Going to an OBGYN and them just throwing, like you said, the Clomid at you, because that happened to me too. Oh,
yeah.
well, let's just start here. Oh, I'm sure
Mhm.
you're going to get pregnant. It'll be fine. All of that kind of
Yeah.
terminology.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's probably what most people are gonna find. However,
Mhm.
I ended up finding somebody who was like known as this like naturopathic doctor. He wasn't even an OBGYN. So I would encourage women to just, whoever it is, find that person who's going to do a full panel to check your
Yeah.
thyroid, to check to see if you have MTHFR gene, which I do, and it's very
Yeah.
common that women
Yeah.
do, so that you can start taking the vitamins that you need or the supplements to help in getting pregnant.
Right. Yeah. And, it's it's one of those things where, if they don't bother to take the blood work, and, I already knew that beforehand with my thyroid. I already knew I had a thyroid issue, so I had already started doing the research of, like, fertility and thyroid issues, specifically hypothyroidism. And so it started there, but obviously there needs to be more done, blood work wise, that I think that more women need to talk to their doctors about. They need to ask for certain testing to be done, and do the
Yeah.
research, because a lot of times they may not even bring it up because they may think, oh, well, that's not the issue based on what they're telling me is going on. And it could very well be a cause. And
Yeah,
so, yeah.
it's
So,
true. So now you're kind of okay, we're at this place again.
yeah.
Um, and I guess you're just kind of leaving it out there just to see what happens before you make any real decisions.
Well, so I am 36. I will be 37 next year in July. And I do feel, for myself personally, I didn't really want a large age gap with my son. I just thought, like, oh, well, I got pregnant naturally. Of course, the first year, I'm like, don't even talk to me about another baby. I was just,
Yes.
like, don't talk to me about a baby yet. I was still like sleepless nights, like, no. Of course,
Yes.
you just, you know. So you just want to enjoy your baby too. You're not trying to just, have another one. Obviously, if it happened, of course we would,
Of course.
but yeah, so that wasn't really on my mind. And, as the years kind of went on, my husband had some issues with, some job stability and things like that. And, we had some issues we had to work through in our marriage. So, as the years kind of went on, it was more about, I don't want to go out and seek the medication yet, because we needed to deal with some personal things. But if it happened, it happened. That was always my thought process. And I don't know if I was just oblivious or naive, thinking like, oh, maybe this amazing miracle thing will happen again, which it hasn't yet. But yeah, now we're at a point where my son just turned 6, and I'm really kind of hitting hard with my current OB, to hopefully try the Femara medication again. I'm actually on my second round of
Okay.
Femara, and that's kind of what we're doing right now. Again, our insurance where I live, I know some states, they actually, IVF is part of insurance coverage, like they cover that. In the state that I live in, it's not. And so everything would be out of pocket. And it's just, again, it's just not something that we're able to do financially. But I'm starting again with Femara. I was able to get pregnant one time with it. So I'm just kind of leaving it up to God, honestly. And,
Yeah.
a part of me I do feel guilty in some ways because if I do get pregnant again, there will be a larger gap with, you know, my two children. But again, I do have a faith, and I feel like if I was meant to have a child sooner, that it would have happened. And, it kind of is what it is. We love our son. He is the joy of our life, and we spend all our time with him. And, you know, I have to enjoy where I'm at now. And that's just kind of my thought process. So we're kind of going into this a little differently this time. So,
Yeah, I mean, and that's wise. The conversations that I have with so many women are, yeah, like the expectations. You try not to have any,
mhm.
right? Because
Right.
so much of it
Exactly.
is out of your control, and there's really nothing you can do about it. So the mindset of, hey, we're just gonna see where this life takes us and what God does with us. And I know it's easier said than done, believe me, I know. But I would encourage you to um
Mhm.
try not to stress out about the age gap so much, because we do that. I know we do that. We're like, man, if I would love to have my kids, have an age gap like this. But you know what? It's all going to work out. And, you know, we add all that stress on ourselves. And I think about my little brother and I, are almost 10 years apart. And he and I are so close still. So, if that's just any encouragement to you, that it, it, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter.
Right. No, it's true. I mean, even with me and my siblings, I mean, I have a 12-year age gap with the sibling above me. And
Yeah.
now that we're adults, it truly doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter. And, my son's, he's been asking for a sibling for a couple of years now. And so I think there's also that guilt too,
Yeah.
because when you have a child that's asking for a sibling, you're like, I'm sorry, buddy, I'm trying, like yeah, but for me personally, I feel like I'm in a different headspace the second time around because I prayed for a child. I have my child, thankfully. And so if I don't have another child, then I look at it like that's what what the will of God is at this point. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at now. So
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. Your story reminds me, honestly, a lot of mine. Our ages are very similar. I
Mhm.
did the infertility, like the medicated cycles, like you did around that time as well. And then we did the IUIs, and we couldn't afford IVF, so we said, and honestly, like you said, emotionally and mentally, I was checked out after that second IUI was unsuccessful, because I was young, like you. I was in my late 20s, and I'm like, why isn't this working? There's
Right.
no reason. My husband had two girls, or has two girls. And then, it was really, really hard. So, it took many years for me I just put everything to the side because I just couldn't do it. I couldn't get myself to do it. And honestly, we just didn't have the money. So,
Yeah.
10 years later or so, kind of
Yeah.
7, 8 years later, then we did the IVF and all that. But, it's okay to just take breaks. It's okay because,
Yeah.
I've also seen women where they just go and go and go. And when a break could have just benefited them, and
Yeah.
they find themselves in a really dark place. So those
Right.
spaces and those times to rest are important too.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think someone's mental health is top
Yeah,
priority, especially when you're dealing with fertility issues. You need to take breaks for your mental health.
for
It's
sure.
absolutely. And I forgot to mention too, early on, we did also have my husband checked, so we knew that he was fine. There were no issues there. So we knew that it was on my end. So I forgot to
Good.
mention that. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So, is there anything you would have done differently now looking back?
Um, you know, it's hard to say because at the time I thought I was doing everything that I was supposed to do. I do feel like I did a lot of research back then too. I was always on the computer, and maybe that was also kind of again a double-edged sword. Maybe I shouldn't have been on the computer as much, and just researching this and that. And um, I think I did the best I could with the information that I had and the situation that I was in. I think it's also difficult because having a forum like this, like with what you're doing, is so important because I know with myself, I didn't have many women in my life that had fertility issues. And so, like my mom, for example, I mean, she would always make jokes like she could just like breathe and get pregnant. And so, and that's not my experience. And so, she, as much as, as a mother, I think she tried as best as she could to help me. But again, the way that she was, the way that she thought she was helping me, it wasn't helping me because she was just of that same mindset of just relax, it'll happen, you just have to relax. And it's like, if you tell me to relax one more time, I just,
Right.
the amount of people that are like, it'll happen, just relax. It's like, no, that's not that simple.
Yeah, and it's you. Those
um,
are the people who don't have infertility issues or fertility issues.
e- exactly. That's where it's just kind of like the irony there. Like, it's like women that have fertility issues don't tell other women that have fertility issues to relax because they know that does the exact opposite.
Exactly.
But yeah, but again, doing things differently, maybe I would have tried to find a better OB sooner. I think maybe that was, if I could go back, I would do that. Because I kind of hung around with a couple of OBs that, like we talked about earlier, they just didn't put the care into it. And I don't know if it was because of my age or what it was, but it's almost like they didn't take me seriously. So maybe I would have found a better OB sooner.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way about like the REs, like I and after a while, because I had so many years to think about it, I was like, okay, I probably saw a handful and interviewed a handful of different doctors. And that's just because I was in an area where we had that, because there's a lot of people who only have one. So I
right.
had the privilege to be able to have my choice. And I think it's really important. Yeah, it takes a lot more work. And sometimes the consultation fees do add up. But if you find that person and you trust your gut, and if you're, if you believe in prayer, pray about it, and
Mhm.
you'll find the right person for you. I mean, you're I want to say going to bed with the doctor, but you and the doctor are going to try to make a baby, know?
Exactly.
So it's like, you need to make sure that you're making the right decision. Is there anyone that, or anything that you would tell anyone watching this who's starting their infertility journey, or, oh gosh, I think I might need help. That anything that any advice that you could give them that could help um, their journey along the way?
I would say really go into it with no expectations and with a lot of faith.
Mm,
Whatever personal faith someone has or hope, um, because you don't know how long your journey will last. Someone may have an infertility journey where they might take Femara the first time and it may work, or they may, do IVF the first time and it may work, and they have their baby. And then you have people that have been on their journey for years and years and years. And so I think that you have to mentally prepare yourself because no one knows what path they're going to go down. You don't know how long your path is to get to your end goal. And so I would say definitely mentally prepare yourself for possibly, having a longer journey than you think. Because I'll tell you, with my journey, it was from the time that we really started talking about having a baby to the time we had a baby was 5 years. And For me, that seemed like forever, especially when you have family members that are like, well, you've been married for 2 years, where's the baby? You get those questions all the time. And, for some, it's even longer than that. For some, it's shorter. But again, we don't know what straw we're going to draw, when it comes to this. So definitely to get yourself mentally prepared, and, really have hope that it will happen for you.
I
So.
think that's so good. That's so good, Kristen. I think about hope, and a lot of people, they struggle with that, and there were times where I had a lot of hope, and you know how it is, month after month after month, that hope dwindled away very quickly.
Yeah.
And it was those times where it was my darkest times,
Mhm.
and I consumed the void that I was feeling with other things, and it put me in a really, really dark place. I have found that when I have no hope,
Mhm.
I'm in a really bad place, especially when it came to trying to conceive. So I think that is really valuable information, and I know that's going to hit a lot of women's hearts. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, and everyone has their bad days, but you have to pick yourself back up. You have to. It's what's the alternative, Like
Right.
you have to.
That's
So.
exactly right. And I think that was one of the things that, other than the Lord and reading the scriptures and being in worship music and trying to consume myself with his hope that I could get from nowhere else,
Mhm.
that was the thing that kept driving me. Well, what else am I going to do? Am I okay with living a life with my husband and I and his two girls, but me not having any children of my own? Am I okay with that? And that's okay if you're okay with that. But there was something in me that said, that's not what it's supposed to look like
Yeah.
for me. So, to each their own, but I feel like it's a healthy thing to ask yourself, okay, wait a minute. Let me look at the two plan A, plan B, or plan X and plan Y, or whatever, like A, B it, and figure out, okay, am I okay with that? And if not, then pick yourself back up whenever you need to and move right along.
Mhm. I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
It's I mean, and those thoughts do kind of creep into your head like, well, what if I never have children,
Yeah.
I think that's where it's really important to have a strong partner with you that you guys can have these conversations and figure out what it is that you want together and how far you're wanting to go with it because
Right.
some women may decide, well, I've done two IUIs and one IVF, and that's all I can take, and that's okay. It just everyone has to know their threshold of
That's right.
how far they're willing to go. Definitely.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, spot on. I know for us, and that changed over the years.
Mhm.
But we started in our late 20s, so we had that time, and but some people don't have that time. But I think that's super, super helpful.
Right.
Thank you
Yeah.
again, Kristen, for your time. I think we
Thank
we
you.
went over a lot of good stuff and a lot of things that women are dealing with and that are facing fertility issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.